People weren't ready for this, not because the information didn't exist, but because almost no one was looking at the timeline the right way. For years, XRP has been discussed in fragments. Price movements here, court updates there, partnerships mentioned briefly and then forgotten. But when someone finally laid everything out in sequence, step by step, it forced a very uncomfortable realization. This wasn't random. This wasn't chaos. This was structured. What made it unsettling wasn't hype or speculation. It was how calm the timeline looked once you removed emotion from the picture. Events that felt disconnected suddenly lined up. Delays that looked like failures started to resemble preparation, and moments that were dismissed as setbacks began to look like checkpoints. Before we go any further, let me say this clearly. This conversation is for educational and informational purposes only. There are no predictions here, no guarantees, and no financial advice. This is about understanding structure, not chasing outcomes. Now, here's where the hook really begins. Most people believe timelines in crypto are written by price. If the price moves up, the story feels successful. If the price moves sideways or down, the story feels broken. But price is one of the last things to react. It's not the driver. It's the reflection. When the XRP timeline is examined without price as the main character, something very different appears. You start to see a project that was never meant to sprint. It was designed to survive scrutiny, regulation, and long-term integration into systems that don't move quickly or care about public opinion. Think about how financial infrastructure actually changes in the United States. It doesn't explode overnight. It moves through committees, regulatory review, compliance checks, pilot programs, and legal frameworks. This process is slow by design because the cost of failure is massive. XRP entered that environment early, long before most crypto projects even acknowledged regulation as a real factor. That decision alone shaped the entire timeline. Instead of chasing short-term adoption, XRP was forced into a position where it had to prove durability, not excitement, durability. And durability doesn't look impressive on a chart. One of the most misunderstood periods in the XRP timeline is the long stretch where nothing seemed to happen. No explosive rallies, no constant headlines, just silence. But silence doesn't always mean inactivity. In complex systems, silence often means internal work. Behind that silence were discussions about compliance, liquidity corridors, cross-border settlement efficiency, and how digital assets could fit into existing financial frameworks without breaking them. Those aren't conversations that generate social media buzz. They generate documents, tests, and slow progress. This is where many people lost patience, and that loss of patience shaped public perception more than reality. Then came the regulatory confrontation. For many projects, that would have been the end for XRP. It became part of out of the timeline. Painful, public, and slow, but also clarifying. Every question raised forced definitions. Every challenge forced structure. And structure is what institutions require before they even consider participation. What most people missed during that time was that the timeline didn't stop. It narrowed. Focus shifted from expansion to defense, from growth to survival. That's not glamorous, but it's necessary. When someone recently exposed the XRP timeline in full, this was the moment that caught people off guard. They realized the project didn't pause. It rerouted, and rerouting is not the same as retreating. Another detail that shocked viewers was how early certain pieces were put in place. Liquidity solutions, payment rails, global connections. These weren't reactions, they were foundations. Foundations are invisible until the structure above them starts to matter. This is where the word prepared becomes important. Markets reward preparation quietly and punish impatience loudly. XRP's timeline is a case study in that principle. Now let's talk about psychology, because timelines don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the minds of participants. Retail investors tend to anchor their expectations to short cycles, weeks, months, maybe a year. Institutions think in multi-year windows, sometimes decades. When those two timelines overlap, frustration is inevitable. XRP spent years existing in a timeline that most retail participants couldn't emotionally tolerate. That doesn't make retail wrong. It makes the mismatch real. Another part of the exposure that caught people off guard was how little XRP's core mission changed over time. While narratives shifted around it, the actual goal remained consistent: efficient, scalable value transfer across borders. That consistency is rare in crypto. Many projects pivot repeatedly, chasing relevance. XRP didn't pivot much. It absorbed pressure instead. That doesn't generate excitement, but it generates alignment. Alignment is what systems need to connect. As this timeline was laid out publicly, people began to notice something else. The moments of peak attention didn't always line up with the moments of greatest progress. In fact, some of the most important developments happened when attention was lowest. That's uncomfortable because it challenges the idea that visibility equals value. Visibility is often just noise. Another shock came from realizing how much of the timeline was shaped by what didn't happen. No rushed launches, no reckless promises, no constant rebranding. Those absences were intentional, not accidental. Restraint is rarely rewarded in speculative markets, but it's essential in regulated ones. The timeline also revealed how external events influenced internal pacing, global financial stress, policy shifts, changing attitudes toward digital assets. None of these happen in isolation. XRP's timeline intersects with all of them. That intersection is why it continues to be discussed, even when price action is unremarkable. Now here's where suspense deepens. When people say, nobody was prepared, what they really mean is that fireworks are visible. Groundwork is not, but groundwork determines what's possible later. As this exposure spread, reactions followed predictable patterns. Some people dismissed it immediately, some felt validated, some became uncomfortable. Discomfort is a sign that assumptions are being challenged. That's not a bad thing. Understanding a timeline doesn't mean agreeing with its outcome. It means seeing the structure that produced it, and structure explains behavior far better than emotion ever could. Before continuing, if you're finding this breakdown valuable, take a second to like the video. It helps content like this reach people who want understanding instead of noise. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. We focus on context, not hype. Now back to the timeline. Another overlooked aspect was how XRP's technology matured quietly. Speed, cost efficiency, and reliability improved incrementally, not dramatically. That kind of improvement doesn't create headlines, but it creates confidence among the people who actually use systems. Confidence compounds. This is also where misconceptions about missed opportunities come in. Many assume that if price didn't explode early, the opportunity disappeared. That assumes price is the only measure of progress. History shows that's rarely true. Infrastructure technologies often appear boring right until they become essential. The exposure of the XRP timeline forced a reevaluation of what success even looks like in crypto. Is it volatility or is it integration? Is it attention or is it endurance? And this is where the timeline stops being just historical and starts becoming psychological. Because once preparation is in place, timing becomes the only variable left. Timing is the part nobody can see clearly in real time. And that's exactly why most people miss it. They look for signals in price instead of signals in structure. And by the time price reacts, the timeline has already moved forward. What the exposure really did was force people to confront an uncomfortable idea that waiting is not the same thing as wasting time. In fast-moving markets, waiting feels like failure. Silence feels like weakness. But in systems that interact with regulation, infrastructure, and global finance, waiting is often a requirement. You don't get to skip steps just because impatience is loud. When you examine the XRP timeline through that lens, the pauses stop looking accidental. They start looking intentional. Each phase aligns with a different external condition: legal clarity, institutional readiness, technological maturity, and global economic pressure. None of these move at the speed of retail sentiment. This is where many narratives break down. People assume innovation should move faster every year, but financial innovation doesn't scale like consumer apps. The higher the stakes, the slower the movement. That's not inefficiency. Expectations were misaligned. People expected fireworks. The timeline delivered groundwork.